Okay, thank you. So, very, very warm welcome to our webinar today about the environmental impacts of AI data centers. We're going to hear more from Jill, from Mary, from Ollie, and from Mary about the impacts of AI data center expansion in Europe and across the UK. And we're also very excited that Mary is going to tell us about how we can take action to challenge an application for funding by Drax Power Station to power an AI data center. And just to give you an overview of the agenda, thank you so much, Mary. We are going to be hearing from our amazing speakers. So Jill McArdle, who's the International Corporate Campaigner with Beyond Fossil Fuels, Mary Stevens, who's the Experiments Programme Manager at Friends of the Earth, Oliver Hayes, who's the Head of Policy and Campaigns with Global Action Plan, and Mary Dickinson, who is the coordinator of the Stop Burning Trees Coalition. And Stop Burning Trees is a wonderful coalition of lots of different groups. Biofuel Watch is part of the coalition, and together we are trying to challenge power stations, particularly in the UK, like Drax, that are cutting down forests around the world and burning them for energy. And just to give you a brief overview of the agenda, I'm going to start off with a little introduction to Drax's AI data center funding application and why it's such a concern for the environment. And then we're going to hear about data center applications across Europe and the explosion of data centers and why they are such a concern for the environment. And Jill's going to tell us more about the impact in Europe. And then Mary is going to tell us more about UK policy for AI growth zones and data centres here with the UK government. And then Ollie is going to tell us about a really important legal case and local resistance to AI data centres here in the UK. And then Mary will tell us more about how we can take action to challenge Drax's AI data centre bid. So, first of all, if we go on to, you might have heard a lot in the news about artificial intelligence, and the government is very excited about artificial intelligence and is plowing lots of money and capacity into expanding data centers, and they call it the defining opportunity of our generation. And I'd just like to start with a quote from Keir Starmer in January this year. He calls this the global race of our lives. And he said, Britain is going to shape the future. We are going to create the wealth and we are going to make artificial intelligence work for everyone in our country. He said,
Well, a load of
Britain will be one of the great AI superpowers. We're going to create AI growth zones. This is a government that backs the builders. So if you're looking at where to build your data centers, we will speed up planning permission. AI has arrived, our defining opportunity is here, and together we will harness it for the good of our country. So, according to Keir Starmer and the government, AI is this incredible opportunity to build wealth for the country. But what about the impacts on wildlife, on people, and the environment, as well as the climate? Well, one application for an AI data center that we're extremely concerned about has come from Drax Power Station in Yorkshire. And Drax announced in June this year that it has submitted a funding application to the government along with North Yorkshire Combined Authority, North Yorkshire Council, and the University of York, as well as other organisations, to become one of 5 AI technology growth zones in the UK. And according to the proposal, Drax near Selby in Yorkshire would be home to a new AI and clean energy campus. And if you have a look at the government's funding page for these AI growth zones, the government says that they are going to prioritise any kind of site that is near clean, low carbon energy. And this is just the next slide. Thank you so much. And also, they're going to give funding priority to any sites that can offer low carbon energy storage infrastructure. So, Drax has submitted this very concerning application and that it wants to power an AI data center by burning trees. And the massive problem is that burning trees is the opposite of clean energy. And this is just the next slide. Drax is actually the UK's single largest carbon emitter. Last year alone, the power station emitted over 13 million tonnes of carbon dioxide. And another huge concern for the environment, if Drax gets this AI data centre funding, is that the power station is already the biggest tree burner in the entire world. Almost all of the wood that it burns is imported, and much of it comes from the clear felling of forests in the southern USA, Canada, Estonia, and Latvia. And the majority of the wood that it's burning comes from the southeastern USA. And this is just the next slide. Thank you so much. And the forests that it's importing wood from are at the heart of a global biodiversity hotspot. They're incredibly important for many rare and endangered species, but these forests are being cut down for Drax. And you may also have seen on BBC Panorama that there have been incredibly important investigations that Drax is also logging previously untouched primary forests in British Columbia in Canada. And 2 years after that initial Panorama investigation, BBC Panorama went back to Canada and found that Drax is still burning rare forest wood, and it has misreported its data about where it is sourcing this wood. And just last month, the Financial Conduct Authority in Britain launched an investigation over concerns about where Drax is getting its wood from. So this is the opposite of a clean energy company that's now proposing to get even more of our public money to use its tree burning to fund an AI data center. Thank you. And if we just move on to the next slide. And as well as harming wildlife, Drax is a catastrophe for communities around the world because its wood pellet production is polluting communities, particularly in the southeastern USA, where people are suffering air, water, and noise pollution and very severe health impacts, including cancer, heart disease, and breathing difficulties. Drax has actually been accused of driving environmental racism in the southeastern USA. It's settled multiple air pollution violation claims, and it's been fined for violating air pollution limits. And earlier this year, Mississippi's Department of Environmental Quality refused Drax permission to get a permit to increase its pollution at its pellet mill in Gloucester, Mississippi. But Drax has appealed that decision, and there's going to be a really important hearing next month in Gloucester in Mississippi. And we're going to be sharing more soon about how we can support the community there to stand up to this massive polluter. And if we go on to the next slide, thank you so much. And another very concerning aspect of Drax's AI data center funding bid is that the power station claims it should get the public money to power this data center because it will deliver carbon negative power using carbon capture and storage technology, and that it can help the UK meet climate targets. But what Drax hasn't said in its funding application is that there are no known examples anywhere in the world of carbon capture and storage from wood burning actually working. Drax admitted as far back as 2021 that it doesn't have any real-world evidence about bioenergy with carbon capture and storage being able to work. And Drax has released all of the carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. As far as we are aware, it hasn't been doing more research into how to do this carbon capture and storage. And it would need an enormous pipeline across Yorkshire and Humberside out into the North Sea to be able to transport any carbon dioxide it captures. And there's no planning permission for this pipeline. What Drax has been capturing is lots of money. Drax already gets huge amounts of money from our energy bills to burn trees. It currently gets over £2 million every single day. And in June this year, a small committee of MPs voted for Drax to be able to get a subsidy extension to at least 2031, again at our expense. So we need to make sure that it doesn't get even more money for this AI data center. And if we move on to the next one. Thank you. And a massive concern is that when the Energy Minister, Michael Shanks, announced that Drax was going to be getting a subsidy extension, he claimed that Drax will play a much more limited role in our energy system. But if it gets the funding application for the AI data center, that would allow Drax to burn even more trees, which would lead to more forest destruction, more harm to wildlife, more pollution of communities, and more climate wrecking emissions. So it's absolutely vital that we make sure that Drax doesn't get this funding for an AI data center, and we need to speak out and call on our MPs to say no to this funding bid. And Mary is going to tell us more in a little bit about how we can take action. There are lots of things we can do. But Drax's funding application is just one of many across the UK and Europe. And to hear more about the wider picture of AI data centre impacts on the environment, we're very excited to be joined by Jill McArdle, who is the International Corporate Campaigner at Beyond Fossil Fuels. And Beyond Fossil Fuels is a European network of civil society organisations who are campaigning on transitioning the power sector in Europe away from fossil fuels and into renewable energy by 2035. And we're thrilled to be joined by you, Jill. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sally. Yeah, really glad to be here. I will share my screen now. Is that okay? That works. Share. So normally now you should see my slides. Yes? Yes, now. Great. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm from Beyond Fossil Fuels. As Sally introduced us, we are focused on getting the power sector in Europe off fossil fuels and onto renewable energy as part of the energy transition in Europe. This is not the only part of the energy transition, but it's a big part to get our electricity use and our energy use off of fossil fuels, especially as energy demand is increasing and increasing in Europe, and data centers are playing a big role there. And that's how we ended up as Beyond Fossil Fuels. We're not traditionally looking at data centers and big tech companies, but we ended up looking at this because of the impact we could see on the energy transition. I think that works. So I wanted to talk a bit about Europe, but firstly, to just give a little background on what's driving the overall demand, and we've talked about AI a bit, and to show how AI is impacting like data center growth. So data centers are expanding everywhere. There's a lot of different projections about how big the growth is going to be, a lot of uncertainty about if it's going to be a bubble, if it's going to burst. There's a lot of uncertainty there, but we do know that today a lot of new data centers are being built, and that AI is kind of the primary driving force. And this graph shows like the amount of data center compute capacity that is anticipated to go to AI, and every year it is increasing and increasing. And on the right here, you can see that of the money that's being poured in, because there are billions and trillions being anticipated to be poured into data center expansion. And the biggest part of that money is coming in to support AI processing. So we know that AI is really a huge driving force, especially behind the money. And then at the bottom here, you can also see I put in some of the logos of the big tech companies, because there's a few different actors in that, but like Google, Microsoft, Amazon are by far the biggest players driving this forward, whether it's with their own money or through financial backing of others. For some reason, when I click, it doesn't change. So okay. So Beyond Fossil Fuels, we looked at the situation in Europe, and we tried to take some existing projections and say, what does this mean for the energy transition, for Europe's climate goals, if we have lots and lots of new data centers coming online? And the first thing we found was that our data centers could consume by 2030 as much electricity as Spain. This may not all materialize, but it's important to see that what we have coming down the line could be very significant. In terms of the energy transition, we are quite concerned about the impact this could have, even if the data centers are powered by renewable energy, which one would think would solve the problem if you don't have emissions, if you have the data centers running on renewable energy. However, we also have other sectors in Europe that need renewable energy and access to any energy in order to electrify and to transition away from fossil fuels. And if we have a lot of new data centers coming in, and the big tech companies tend to have the most market power and the ability to buy energy and renewable energy first, the problem is that other sectors might struggle to access renewable energy. And then this could slow down the energy transition overall, even if the data centers themselves are securing renewable energy. This is already happening in Ireland. So a quick example, in Ireland, where there are a lot of data centers, you can see the red line here is data center energy demand in Ireland, and the blue line is wind energy capacity in Ireland. And you can see that data centers have already just about overtaken the entirety of the wind energy supply in Ireland. And wind energy, of course, makes up a lot more of our energy in Ireland than solar because we have more wind than sun. So that's one issue that we're seeing coming down the line. And the other is, of course, fossil fuels. Because while the data center companies and the big tech companies are buying a lot of renewable energy today, they're also very willing to take fossil fuels to power their new data centers, especially their AI data centers, because there is kind of an insatiable hunger to grow as rapidly as possible in this AI race that we're in. And so they're buying renewables, but they're also buying fossil fuels. So we have this handy meme to explain in a nutshell the attitude we have today of the companies. And yeah, we looked at what the implications could be if fossil fuels power data centers in Europe. And we found that if even 60% of the new data centers were powered by fossil fuels, we could see a big jump in emissions from data centers up to like 121 million tons. Um, and the fact is, this risk, this fear is really materializing today and is becoming a reality in Europe. In the US, we know that gas and coal are back on the agenda for data centers, but it's less clear what's happening in Europe. And people maybe assume that the situation is a bit better in Europe. But actually, what we're starting to see more and more is evidence that data centers want to run on gas and fossil fuels in Europe. Here we have examples from Dublin with Microsoft, from Germany, where they want to build on-site gas plants to power big data centers. And then, of course, the UK news recently, which I think our other colleagues will talk about a bit. But yeah, the news that the UK government is being pushed to use more and more gas to fuel this AI revolution that they are supposedly experiencing. And at the top there, there's a quote from Jensen Huang. He's the CEO of NVIDIA, which is the biggest chip maker in the world. And he is telling the UK that it would be fantastic if we could have a few more gas turbines in the UK to power AI. And I wanted to reflect a little bit on what's justifying all of this. I think at the beginning, Sally shared some slides about Keir Starmer talking about how important AI is for the UK. And I wanted to share also this narrative is very, very powerful and is taking hold in a lot of places and is very much driven by the tech companies who have an interest in selling their AI products. These are companies that have invested a lot and are investing billions in a product that is not currently today very profitable, and they really need to create markets for this product. And so it is no surprise that companies like Google are telling the UK that they absolutely need to build more data centers and to buy more AI products from Google itself. So this is a strong narrative which is justifying the need to build more gas. The second part of that narrative is the idea that the AI will be a climate solution and that AI will in fact reduce emissions in the future. And therefore, we don't have to worry about the environmental impacts of AI today. Some examples here of Google, for example, talking about Europe's climate goals as an opportunity to be supported by AI. There are studies supposedly coming out that talk about the emission savings of AI, and there are attempts here to offset the emissions from data centers with the supposed future savings of emissions that AI will bring. This is a very dangerous and risky narrative. You cannot offset today's real world quantifiable rising emissions from data center and other AI infrastructure with speculative future hypothetical emission savings that frankly may never materialize because we really don't know if these AI benefits are ever going to fully materialize. Yet this is a very powerful narrative being pushed, especially by the big tech companies and their allies today. Yeah, and then I'm pretty much finished. I just wanted to then reflect a bit more hopeful, but also talking about what we can actually do about this. So back in February, we worked on a statement of about 130 organizations that they signed up to on what could be done to address the kind of spiraling impact of AI. And a few ones I wanted to flag. One is we need commitments to actually phase out fossil fuels from all AI infrastructure. And that means like no data center should be built today that is not running on renewable energy. And this is like a bare minimum requirement. We need to then talk about computing limits. So how much compute power do we really need? Do we really need all the AI? What is essential versus non-essential? This is a conversation that we need to be having more and more. And transparency, because today the companies are are really, this is a very intransparent market. Data centers are literally a black box. You do not know their energy needs. You do not know the fuel that they are using. You do not know what the workloads they are running. And the companies do not want to tell us this information. And that needs to change if we want to solve this problem in the future. Yeah, and I will end it there. Thank you very much.
That was incredible, Jill. Thank you so much. Really wonderful. And please feel free if you have any questions for Jill, if you'd like to add them in the chat. We're going to have time for a Q&A after the presentations. And I'm very excited to announce our next speaker and welcome Mary Stevens, who co-leads the Experiments programme at Friends of the Earth, England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And Mary has been working on issues around artificial intelligence development on and off since 2018. And she published a report on AI and environmental justice with the support of the Green Screen Coalition in February this year. And she is currently updating Friends of the Earth's public position on data centers. We're so excited to be joined by you, Mary. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you very much, Sally. And just to say, I don't have any slides to share. I will share some links in the chat afterwards. And I think I can be quite brief because actually Sally's done a fantastic job in setting out the situation with regard to Drax. And I should say that at Friends of the Earth, we've been long-term supporters of all the work that the Biofuel Watch and have been doing in the campaign against Drax. Again, I can share a little bit later our position on Drax if that's helpful. But Sally set that up brilliantly, and Jill's done a fantastic job also at setting out the actually the kind of international picture. So I'm just going to speak very briefly about what the UK government is planning in relation to AI growth zones. So what this kind of policy window of opportunities to influence these decisions are, and how these plans are in conflict with our wider climate and nature goals here in the UK. So I think with regard to what the UK government is planning around AI growth zones. So earlier this year, at the start of this year, the UK government published something called its AI Opportunities Action Plan. And in that plan, or alongside that plan, it invited termed expressions of interest for AI growth zones. And that's what we heard about just at the start from Sally. And the intention being that that these will be partnerships that are successful in applying for AI growth zones will have enhanced access to power and support for planning approvals. It's worth knowing that data centres in the UK are now classed as critical national infrastructure. And the government has also announced the intention to consult on designating the really big data centres as nationally significant infrastructure projects. They're not nationally significant infrastructure projects yet. I think that's important to know. Should they become so, which there's an awful lot of pressure from the big tech companies we were just hearing about for that to become the case. But should they become nationally significant infrastructure projects, that would take a lot of the decisions over their construction out of the hands of local authorities. But at the moment, although, and I think Ollie will probably speak to this a little bit more, although they can be called in by the Secretary of State, the local planning authorities do still have a role in decision making here. The government has allocated £2 billion for investment in this infrastructure. That's separate from announcements that you might have heard recently around linked to President Trump's visit, where we had announcements totaling about 31 billion, I think, that's been pledged by big tech, including a 22 billion pound investment from Microsoft. But this is, the UK government has announced it's going to allocate £2 billion to this infrastructure. And as we've heard, one of these expressions of interest has come from North Yorkshire Combined Authority in partnership with North Yorkshire Council and Drax. I should say, we don't know exactly how many bids have been submitted. We think it's around 200. The government has said there will be 5 AI growth zones. So it is worth knowing, I think, that at the moment, although you wouldn't know this from the way that the local authorities are talking about it, it's being kind of positioned as a done deal, because I think when you talk about it as something that's, a done deal, it makes it sound, it kind of increases the likelihood of it happening in a way. But for the moment, as far as I understand, it is just still a bid. And I do think there is interesting conflicts of interest here that I'm sure others will be more aware of. But in North Yorkshire being both the planning authority and one of the parties to this bid. I think Jill has done a great job at setting out what these plans mean for kind of climate and nature goals. And I think it's really important to say that this is one of our big objections to data centers at Friends of the Earth, that we're not against, and it's really important to know this, we're not against all uses of AI, we're not necessarily against data centers as such, but we do think we have a big problem in the way that they're being developed completely in isolation from our climate and environment goals. And I think it's worth saying that it's not just us who thinks this, other quite significant bodies think this. So the Royal Academy of Engineering, of all people, agrees with that position. Something called the Government Digital Sustainability Alliance, who are a cross-sector group convened by the government to drive progress on sustainability in the government's digital operations. They agree with this too, and they've recently said that the UK's ambition to be a global leader in AI and a top destination for technology businesses creates a direct tension with its net zero commitments and existing water scarcity challenges. And just to put a bit of UK-based kind of colour into what Jill was talking about, the chief executive of the National Grid stated in 2024 that he expected power use by data centres to increase sixfold in the next 10 years. And of course, there are also massive water implications. I'm not gonna talk too much about that. And again, Global Action Plan and Foxglove have been doing great work on this. We don't really know how much water data centres consume. Could be anywhere between 1.5 and 19 million litres of water a day. At the top end for the kind of biggest hyperscale data centres, that is roughly equivalent to the entire population of York. So yes, we were signatories to that declaration that Jill shared at the end, and we thoroughly support the idea that we think data centres must be required to source 100% renewable electricity, and that strict additionality criteria must be applied to make sure that only new renewable capacity counts, because what we're seeing at the moment is an awful lot of double counting. I'm just going to explain that briefly. So if you look on any of these bids for, we've seen that Drax is saying it's going to be a clean energy campus and carbon negative. But if you look at any of the bids that have been submitted, all of them are promising that everything will be powered by green energy, but an awful lot of that is either greenwashing or double counting. So I was recently asked to look into this question in relation to plans for infrastructure in Wales, which is quite interesting because it's a smaller country, it's a bit easier to see the whole picture. And in 2023, Wales added, just to give some kind of colour to this, Wales added about just over 100 megawatts of new renewable capacity. That's roughly about 10% of what's needed each year in order to meet Wales's decarbonisation targets by 2035, existing targets. But it's also only 2/3 of what just one new massive data centre in Wales might need, and there are 9 in the pipeline, and they're all claiming they'll be powered by renewables. So there is no way that this stacks up. And this, as Jill spoke to a little bit, this is absolutely opening, kind of extending a lifeline to dirty power and extending a lifeline to the fossil fuel industry. So what we're seeing is the energy companies jumping in to say, aha, well, renewable power, it's unreliable, it's intermittent, it's not available yet, we don't have the grid connections. This means we need more gas, maybe just as an interim measure. And I think this is exactly the same logic that we're seeing at Drax. Basically, AI has thrown, a dirty, dirty business a lifeline, and we need to call it out for what it is. And we know, the reason that we know that the fossil fuel companies are pushing for more gas in the AI supply chain and fossil fuels in general is because thanks to a Freedom of Information request, we've seen the minutes from something called the AI Energy Council. That's a body that the government has sort of convened to advise it on how to source energy for AI. But it's almost entirely composed of big tech and big fossil fuel companies. And the minutes make it very clear that that those companies have been pushing for gas as an interim measure, but essentially on-site gas turbines to enable rapid build out of this infrastructure. So I think hopefully that kind of provides enough context about what's kind of the UK picture. I should say also that there's more you can say also about the supply chain, the whole supply chain of data centers, right from kind of the extraction of the minerals and so on needed for their construction, right up to end of life and e-waste, where the impacts are also huge. And that's partly why at Friends of the Earth we're also campaigning for a new UK Business Human Rights and Environment Act. And it's really clear that must include the tech sector and its supply chain from the raw material extraction to end of life and disposal. So I mean, I just want to reinforce Jill's message really about the importance of this AI development being brought within planetary boundaries. You know, and I think it's really, really important to ask some questions here about what is actually going on with Drax and with the University of York. Just to close, I live in Bristol. Last year, the University of Bristol opened a new data centre. It's supposed to be the 11th most powerful supercomputer in the world. I don't know how long that's going to last for. It's been recognised in sustainability rankings and so on. It's about a mile up the road from me, and it draws only 5 megawatts of power, and the power demands that is being put together through 200 megawatts of power. What on earth is that for? What do we need all this? What is this being used for? What is this computing capacity actually for? You know, the University of Bristol is making big claims about how this new data center is advancing research in healthcare and climate and so on. And I've no doubt it does. But I think actually the University of York really ought to take a good, long, hard look at itself, and I think should be quite ashamed that it's providing a fig leaf for extending Drax's dirty power. I'm going to stop at that point and hand over to Ollie, I think.
That was phenomenal. Thank you, Mary. That was absolutely wonderful. And please feel free if you've got any questions for Mary to pop them in the chat, and we'll have time after we hear from Ollie and Mary for questions and discussion. So I'm really excited to pass to Ollie Hayes now. Ollie is the head of policy and campaigns at Global Action Plan, where he leads the organization's campaigning on the climate harms of big tech's destructive business model. And Global Action Plan has recently launched a new campaign to limit the expansion of AI data centers. And we're thrilled that you're here with us today, Ollie. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Sally. And yeah, thank you so much, Jill and Mary, for that incredibly comprehensive and insightful, those insightful as intros. I'll try not to cover anything which has been covered before. I'll just add a few things from our perspective. So as Sally mentioned, we have been campaigning for a while on the climate harms of the big tech business model. And that's kind of the obvious ones in terms of the direct emissions, some of the kind of slightly less obvious ones, including how the advertising-based business model fuels hyperconsumption, hyperconsumerism, and also how misinformation and hate and conspiracy, which are at the heart of this business model, are fueled by it, and therefore make it harder for climate action to take hold, because clearly these are conditions which are completely opposite to the ones that we need in order to tackle the nature of the challenge. To be totally candid, it has been sometimes a bit difficult to kind of engage the established climate movement on the kind of threats of big tech's business model. But we're starting to see that really change with data centers, perhaps because that is just they are the kind of physical manifestation of this business model writ large. And as others have mentioned, you know, the scale of the power needs of these data centers as they're coming on stream, this new generation of hyperscale data centers, is really eye-watering. I'll come on to some of the specifics of that, but just an additional thing which hasn't yet been covered is that one of the things that AI and the data centers underpinning them is enabling is a massive additional extraction of fossil fuels. So whilst, as others have said, the industry is doing all it can to present AI as a climate solution and kind of waving the potential future climate benefits of AI around as a fig leaf for everything they're doing, the reality is that the earliest and biggest clients of the industry are the fossil fuel companies who have been using machine learning and AI for a number of years to maximize fossil fuel extraction and to extract fossil fuels that were not previously able to be extracted. So that is the reality of where the industry's efforts are going. As Sally mentioned, we are running a new campaign to limit the rollout of AI data centers in the UK. We have a number of objectives within that campaign, but we really want to set a legal precedent that planning consent should be contingent on having a positive environmental impact, or at least not an additionally negative environmental impact. And as part of that, we have been working with our partners at Foxglove Legal, where we are now joint claimants in a judicial review of a recent decision made by the Secretary of State to overturn a local planning authority's decision where the local planning authority, this was in Buckinghamshire, turned down an application for a data centre twice, in fact. That was then called in, and the planning inspectorate recommended that be overturned, and the Secretary of State overturned it. We, in this particular argument, I mean, it's fairly astonishing, really, but there was deemed to be no environmental impact assessment necessary in this decision. And that really rests on this very flawed notion that the impacts of the data center are limited to what is happening literally on the site and not downstream. And we are making the case that if you are, as a data center, generating an enormous additional power demand, which is going to be met by the grid and is only therefore as green as the grid is, and we don't have a 100% renewable grid, clearly, then by default, a massive additional energy demand will result in additional emissions, and that needs to be considered, and it hasn't been considered. So that's the kind of nature of our case, and clearly we are making that argument specifically relating to this decision, but we want that to be precedent setting. We want developers everywhere to start engaging with this and to be forced to engage with this very obvious downstream impact of their activities. In addition to taking legal action, we are also really determined to support campaigners and activists and local groups who are resisting data centers in their communities. There seem to be so many parallels to another sort of new industry that tried to get off the ground a while ago, which was the fracking industry, where kind of there was huge consensus within Westminster that this was needed, and you couldn't really win the argument within Parliament that this would be a bad idea. But in communities where the industry was being foisted upon people, there was massive resistance, and it was from that kind of grassroots up resistance that actually the tide eventually turned. And we think that it's likely to be something quite similar here, partly because the benefits to local people and local communities of AI data centers are so few, and clearly the benefits are really being accrued by Silicon Valley, if anywhere. So we're really keen to support people who are resisting these data centers with linking up with other groups and with activist resources, bringing in planning expertise or legal expertise, or pointing people towards that where we can. As part of that, and hopefully will be shared in the chat, we have crowdsourced a map of where we think all of the planned data centers are in the UK. And we really would like people to be sharing that and adding or contacting us if there's anything missing from that, so that we can add more detail to it, because I think the more that people are able to see what's coming for their local area, the quicker and the quicker that resistance will start to grow. We're really delighted that we've been able to bring on a new campaigner to help us work with this, who I think is on the call actually, my colleague Owen. So anyone who wants to talk to us about local resistance can get in touch with us, and Owen will be the person to talk to. The other thing that we want to push for, and I'm aware I'm running out of time here, as others have mentioned, there is absolutely no suggestion that national government are considering these applications in the round and what that means for our carbon targets, for water security, or for anything. And so we really want to push for a national strategy on data centres that sets out the parameters of what the grid can afford, what the trade-offs are, as others have mentioned. You know, if data centers are going to get all this renewable energy, what isn't, what can't get built? And we're already seeing examples of where, for instance, housing projects in West London have been paused because the grid is overwhelmed by data centers, and therefore the housing projects can't get onto the grid. One opportunity that we see coming up, and we would urge you all to engage with there, is, as Mary mentioned, the proposal from government to move data center planning decisions from local planning authorities into the nationally significant infrastructure project regime. And to do that, they have to issue a national policy statement, which the minister in the Lords said last week they were planning to do next year. And also, as part of that national policy statement, there will be considerations of the sector's sustainability. So that seems to be a really key opportunity to actually lobby government for meaningful consideration of what this is all for, how much of it we can cope with, what the mitigations should be, and the expectations on developers. And we think in lieu of those expectations at the moment, and in lieu of any transparency from the industry, that really there should be a pause on permitting these developments. And so we would, support calls for a moratorium until there is much clearer parameters set out. So I hope we can share in the chat a bit more detail. There's a good guiding piece about our legal challenge. We do, I would be remiss not to mention, we do also have a crowdfunder where we're trying to raise some of the essential, some of the costs to cover the essential legal work in that crowdfunder, in that case, which we've got running via Crowd Justice. So hopefully that can go in the chat as well. And we have been, as Mary said, working on a case-by-case basis, looking at some of these individual applications to see what their true energy and associated carbon costs are. To give a bit of scale, just one application which is going through in Bedfordshire at the moment for a data centre in Houghton Regis, which will be run by Amazon, just using the energy information that was in the planning application, shows that will use the same amount of energy. This one data center will use the same amount of energy as 42,500 households, which is the same as a town the size of Burnley. And we know there are over 50 data centers in the planning pipeline in the UK. So the implications for UK energy use are enormous. And the final thing to say is the AI Energy Council, which Mary already mentioned, Mary's suggestion, actually, we put in an FOI to see what was happening with the much touted sustainability working group, which is supposed to be reporting into that council. And the FOI came back recently to say that sadly they've not yet met or formed as a group, but that officials were working very hard to pull that together. Which is an unfortunate oversight because they have had many meetings where the energy companies have been falling over backwards to give the tech companies what they want with the Secretary of State present. So that gives a bit of an indication of the extent to which this is being prioritised or not within government. I will stop there.
That was phenomenal. Thank you so much, Ollie. That was incredible. And please feel free to pop any questions for Ollie in the chat. And we've got our final speaker now, who is Mary Dickinson. And Mary is a researcher and climate justice campaigner who works for the Stop Burning Trees Coalition. She has a history of direct action, and in recent years, she's focused on campaigning against Drax with the Drax Group and with Stop Burning Trees. And Mary is going to share how we can take action to challenge Drax's AI data center funding bid. Thank you so much, Mary.
Thank you, Sally, and thank you also to Mary, Jill, and Ollie for that excellent overview of what's going on, and all the many issues related to Drax's data centers and data centers in general. I'm going to try and keep this really quick so we've got time for questions. Just to sort of recap about the Drax AI data center, and sort of coming from, I live just down the road from Drax, and the way that the coalition works is we're mostly based around Yorkshire and broader across the UK. So we're mobilising this local resistance against the Drax data centre, which has been proposed, as it's been said, between the Uni of York, North Yorkshire Combined Authority, Drax, and then is also being supported by the University of Hull and the University of Sheffield. So it's very much a broader part of Yorkshire that's really campaigning or calling for this data centre to happen in this AI growth zone. And it's offering Drax this opportunity to continue making money in light of the new subsidy arrangement. I think just according to Drax's own bid, the 600 megawatts that they'll be providing for this data centre as a minimum would be the equivalent of powering 1.56 million households, or all of the houses in Sheffield. So we are talking about a huge amount of energy, which means a huge amount of trees burned, a huge amount of carbon emissions, a huge amount of impacts on those communities that are really suffering from Drax's pollution. So we began mobilising about this a couple of months ago when the bid came out, working with BiofuelWatch and loads of other organisations. We've sent in with BiofuelWatch and 63 organisations, including Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace and many more, a letter to the Secretary of State for the department that has this decision, the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, calling on them to reject Drax's bid. I'll be honest, the response from them was incredibly lacklustre. It basically said, we care about the environment and nothing more, which I think, as all of our other speakers have demonstrated, is maybe a bit divorced from the reality. But I think showing how many people oppose this is really important. So we've launched a petition that's sitting at around 6,000 signatures at the moment, really trying to push that to be handing that in soon, because we don't know when this decision on Drax's data centre will be coming. So trying to push that out across our networks, across the region, to make it clear that this is not the investment that we want in Yorkshire. These are not the jobs that we want. Once again, we're seeing Drax and Co selling this as bringing green jobs, new jobs to the region. In reality, like most of those claims, this doesn't seem very close to the truth of the actual impact it will be having on this region and where those jobs and profits will actually be going. Thank you for sharing that in the chat. We've also recently launched a new e-action calling on MPs to speak out against this, to oppose Drax's bid in Parliament. If the government is serious about rolling back how much energy Drax is providing to the grid, building a new data centre that could power the entirety of Sheffield at Drax is the opposite of that. And it's really important that we're making that case to our politicians. On a more regional level, we've also been doing outreach and work with the combined authority, sending briefings to councillors. We know there are some councillors who are actually not that happy about this bid, but it's without the political pressure from all of us to make them pull away from it. And they won't do that because this is being promoted as such a good opportunity for Yorkshire and the Humber, and particularly for North Yorkshire. So it's really, really important that we are making it very clear to them all of the many arguments against Drax's data centre, and making those arguments for the real green jobs and investment that we actually need in this region. And then finally, because it's not just the combined authority, it's not just government, it's not just Drax, it's also these universities that are partnering with Drax and promoting it as something that's important and going to boost their research credentials and all of these sort of things. So I'm really excited to say the University of York students are just launching their campaign against this data centre. They've all just come back to uni and started to mobilise around it. Similarly with the University of Sheffield. And what we have been finding is there is actually a huge amount of opposition to this. When you talk to people, they know that it's absurd to be powering a data centre from Drax's tree burning business. And so there's been a bunch of links dropped in the chat. I'll share some more. But we really just need everyone to be putting as much pressure as possible on the various decision makers, making it clear that there is absolutely no future in getting into bed with Drax and their dirty business. And I'll stop there and we'll move on to questions, I think. Thank you.
Wonderful, Mary. Thank you so much. Incredible. And don't worry, we're going to send out all the links that we've shared in the chat. So you don't need to worry at all. You won't miss anything. I'm very excited to move on to some questions. First of all, we've had a great question from Malcolm. Jill, I wondered if I could ask you this. As an engineer, Malcolm says he can see no reason why data centers need to use water for cooling. Have they not heard of heat pumps or air-to-air pumps? Can you tell us more about data centers and water?
The short answer is no, as I'm not really an expert on water. I can really just speak. We work with some great colleagues, like in Spain. We're doing a lot on the water demand from data centers there, where in like drought-stricken regions where, you have the region of Aragon in Spain where there's prone to droughts, and yet it's also becoming a data center hub, and the data center water needs are just vast. You have offsetting from the companies trying to, I don't know if you've heard of the water offsetting approach, where they try to claim that they can, supply water in a water abundant areas, and this will somehow offset the water use of that they take in more drought stricken areas, which of course doesn't really matter to a drought stricken area if you are kind of supplying water to some other region in the world. But on the technicalities, no, I'm not. We're focused on the energy question, so I'm not even going to try to answer that on the water side.
That was great. Thank you so much, Jill. And I think, Mary, would you like to come in here?
Yeah, I'm just going to say a little bit about this, recognizing that, I'm definitely not an engineer either, but I think one of the interesting things to think about when you're thinking about data center water footprints is that the consumption of water occurs basically in three ways. So it might be caused directly by the data center through the evaporation of water for cooling purposes, but it's also an awful lot of it is used during the generation of electricity to power the data centers as well. So actually the water and the energy questions are quite closely linked. Actually, when you're measuring how much water do they use, there's kind of direct use and there's indirect use, and it's important to think about both those things together. And of course, the water used in the manufacture of components, including the extraction of raw materials. This is probably a technicality not to get into, but I think I have read in some places that more water is actually lost through air because they're operating at such high temperatures. More water is sometimes lost through air cooling through evaporation, and then water being used to cool some of the air than it is through direct cooling from water. But there's that you will see lots of claims from data centers about how they're claiming to how they're reducing the amount of water they use, and I'm sure there is lots they can do to be more efficient, but there is water used right through the supply chain.
Thank you so much.
I'm on the phone, so I can't see the chat, but I have a question. If you can add me to the list of asking them, please.
Yes. Would you like to go now?
Oh, okay, thanks. Steve from Friends of the Earth Grassroots Nuclear Network. So I just wanted to ask the panel if their eyes on the ball of small modular reactors. Already in North America, both Google and Amazon are in touch and working with the consortium that's led by Westinghouse that are making these one model of these so-called small modular reactors. And the Trump US-UK deal last week seeks to cut the approval time for the approval of new designs for safety. It's already been cut from 5 years to 3 years, and the US wants it cut even further. So this is not far away. It's probably within a couple of years that it could happen. And also, if I could ask one other thing, is the nearest data center to me, and quite a lot of the others that are supported by local authorities, instead of going through the new planning process, if they own the land in particular, they're using this as a fundraiser, and they're using local development orders instead of the normal planning process, which means it's extremely difficult to get involved until it's finished. It's basically a fait accompli way of delivering data centers on land owned by local authorities.
Thank you so much. All fantastic questions. I think, Jill, would you like to come in and to answer any of those questions?
Yeah, just on the SMRs, the small modular reactors, I wanted to, from Beyond Fossil Fuels perspective, whenever this is raised by the big tech companies, we just say that this is really off topic because they are not coming in the next 5 years. And if they even come in the next 10 years, it will be a miracle. They're very expensive. The technology is not there yet. Every commercial effort to get a SMR off the ground has failed. There's only about a handful existing in the world, all backed by huge finances from like Russia and China. And there's no commercial pathway to SMRs that exists yet. It could be we see like one or two crop up in Europe with a lot of financial backing behind them because the big tech companies are willing to throw a ton of money at it, but they are not coming in to solve the energy problem in the next 5 to 10 years. So the reality is these companies are still going to be choosing between gas and renewables, and that the SMR conversation for them is really a distraction from the fact that they are burning gas today.
Thank you so much. And we've got a couple of questions for Ollie. One is from Bill Grayson that says governments can now be sued for failure to meet their climate targets. Will this be an effective means for holding them to account? And along a similar theme, we've got a question about, is there a way to sue Drax or AI centres for greenwashing? Because the way that Client Earth and Reclaim Fossil Free Netherlands won the court case against KLM's greenwashing campaign last year was through this kind of legal challenge, and this has set a precedent against greenwashing in the Netherlands. So if you could tell us more about the kind of legal aspect, Ollie, that would be amazing.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to the second one about whether there is a route on the greenwashing side, but yeah, I would be fascinated to explore that. And yes, people are actively looking at whether we can fold this into challenges on broader contradiction to government's broader climate commitments rather than only on the kind of site-specific side of things. And I mean, I know Fo and others have been doing a lot of great work to challenge the government's failure to meet existing climate targets. So it's definitely an open discussion, put it that way.
Thank you so much. And I think we've got time for one more question. Christopher, would you like to go?
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for letting me unmute myself. I've popped an item in chat, and I just wanted to bring to the attention, particularly to Mary, but to the whole group, of an opportunity over the next week or so with York Friends of the Earth to engage with decision makers on this topic. We're running a question time event. We've invited some local politicians, and we're now recruiting audience members to come to the event. Um, I think it would be a great opportunity to engage with this topic. On the panel, we've got two combined authority members, so that's Pete Kilbane and Claire Douglas. Claire is leader of York City Council, also vice chair of the County Climate Commission. Peter is deputy mayor. We've also got Rachel Maskell, the York MP there. So all people who have, I would say, some significant influence over the bid that's taking place. So what I'd like to do is extend the invitation. It would be great if Mary herself could come, but if somebody from the one of the various groups that we have represented here would like to come along, and would you like to ask a question and engage in discussion about this? Just to say a word about the ethos of the event, it's perhaps a little bit old-fashioned and quaint in that we have an emphasis on civility, on respectful debate, which is not something that we hear a lot about in this day and age. However, what we're keen to do is to have some plain speaking and to bring issues out into the open. So it'd be really good if somebody on this call would like to come along, or if a number of you would like to come along. I've put the link in the chat, but can I extend that invitation?
Thank you so much, Christopher. And that's a fantastic idea that we could maybe duplicate in other areas as well, where there are concerns about AI data centers and the impacts on the environment and communities. And I'm afraid we're out of time, but I'd like to thank you all so much for joining. And I'd like to thank our wonderful speakers today, Jill, Mary, Ollie, and Mary. And if you are free at all at 3 o'clock today, there is another webinar that is fantastic that's happening. It's all about the Sustainable Biomass Program, which is what Drax uses to claim that its tree burning is sustainable, and the biomass program has been set up by the biomass industry. So if you're free at 3 o'clock, it'd be fantastic if you'd like to join that webinar. And a massive thank you. We'll be sending out the follow-up email with all the links from today, and we'll try and answer. If we've missed your question, I'm so sorry, and we'll try and answer that as well. But thank you so much, and massive thank you to our incredible speakers. And please carry on with your wonderful campaigning, and we will be able to protect the climate and the environment from this data center expansion and all the impacts. So thank you so much. Lovely to see you. Thank you.
Sally. Thanks so much. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Sally. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.